it was to see the residents that live along the pipeline in Kamloops, in Chilliwack, Langley, Abbotsford, Burnaby, and Vancouver that are fearing for their lives and their health and safety and the health and safety of their loved ones for a spill along this pipeline. I don't know how any government and you as representatives of the government could listen to hundreds of people talk about the potential impact in their communities and still approve this pipeline. So I don't actually live along the pipeline route, but what I can do is the Wilderness Committee has maps of the pipeline route that I would like to present to the panel that show the 120 schools, community centers, and libraries along the pipeline route where people who are there studying, working, and living their lives would be poisoned by carcinogens and toxic chemicals from a pipeline spill. I'll present those to you in a moment. I'm actually fairly new to the Coast Salish territories. I grew up, born and raised in Calgary. And I found it quite funny when I got here, and maybe a little odd that the news reports in this region are so different from Calgary. In Calgary, we get which new oil sands mines are going forward, the potential price of oil forecasts. But in Vancouver, when there was a new orca born in J-Pod, everyone was talking about it in my office the next day, and that was even before I worked for Environmental NGO. And when the salmon fishery is shut down because that river is so warm and because of the bizarre summer we've had in our climate, that's the talk of the town, that people can't go fishing. And I think that this region relies so heavily on our coast. It's a part of who we are, and that's why I truly believe that this pipeline won't get built regardless, because it just cuts so close to everything we hold dear culturally. Besides the cultural impact of a spill, the economic impact would be immense. The industries that this region relies on, and tourism, film, even tech and construction, all of those industries rely on the fact that people want to live here and visit here and work here and film our beautiful scenery that we are so privileged to be surrounded by. All of that would be wiped out in a spill. And so I am from Calgary. I know that that city, in one way or another, everyone is working for a fossil fuel company. But in Vancouver, everyone is working on something that relies on the coast. And it would be devastating to see that be erased. So I am from Calgary, and as such, most of my family, in one way or another, works for the fossil fuel industry, and I know that Alberta is hurting right now. My home province, the last 2 years have been really tough. I have 3 aunts that have been laid off. My dad has had his hours cut back at work, and my uncle's job is basically to go around and shut plants down. But despite all of that, all of the members of my family know that this industry has an expiration date, and that any new pipeline would not raise the price of oil. It's not going to help Alberta to have this pipeline be built. In December of last year, the reason for that is that in December of last year, all the countries of the world got together and agreed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and attempt to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and to make sure it did not rise above 2 degrees. By building more fossil fuel infrastructure, we are betting that the world will fail in its efforts to combat climate change. And the rest of the countries of the world are taking action on this. Those that don't live in a petro-state where our government has been harnessed by fossil fuel corporations are moving towards a low-carbon world. India wants to have 100% electric vehicles on its road by 2030. And China, the main market for this oil, is due to peak in its emissions 8 years early in 2022 rather than 2030. So although there are immense challenges in actually transitioning from fossil fuels, the markets that we want to sell our oil to are no longer going to need it. We are betting everything on black as the board is turning red. And I think that that is cynical and profoundly stupid. So we've heard a lot about the need to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And there's actually a study by a few scientists out of London that looked at where the fossil fuels need to be left in the ground. And Canada has the unfortunate situation of having the most expensive, the lowest quality, and the highest carbon content oil in the world. Our nation is the one that our fuel has to go and be left in the ground first, and that's based on a purely economic analysis of which are easy to exploit. So the study, I'd just like to read you a portion of it, the portion about Canada. Regarding the production of unconventional oil, open pit mining of natural bitumen in Canada soon drops to negligible levels after 2020 in all scenarios, as it is considerably less economic than other methods of production. And keep in mind, this study was actually produced before the target of 1.5 degrees was introduced, so it is modeling based on a 2-degree level. The study also models the potential for carbon capture and storage to be included. I would reject that heavily, both in practice and in theory, that carbon capture and storage could potentially be part of our energy mix. I think Saskatchewan has proved with our project in the Boundary Dam that this technology is not proven in any way, and it would either be massively expensive for tar sands producers to decarbonize and to have the carbon capture and storage operations, or it would be paid for by taxpayers, which is completely unacceptable. But even in that case, production by in situ technologies continues in a 2-degree scenario world that allows CCS. This is accompanied by a rapid and total decarbonization of the auxiliary energy inputs required. Although such a carbonization would be extremely challenging in reality, cumulative production of Canadian bitumen between 2010 and 2050 is still only 7.5 billion barrels. 85% of its 48 billion barrel bitumen reserves thus remain unburnable if the 2-degree limit is not to be exceeded. So even under the mythical fantasy projections that we would somehow be able to electrify all of the tar sand infrastructure and practice carbon capture and storage, that we would still have to leave almost all of our reserves that are on the books in the ground. But the much more likely scenario, which the authors of this report acknowledge, is that when CCS is not available, all bitumen production ceases by 2040. In both cases, the RURR of Canadian bitumen dwarfs cumulative production, so that around 99% of our estimate of its resources remains unburnable. So, Kim, in Kamloops, you asked the representative from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers when he thinks the transition would happen. And I hope you were as disappointed, but maybe not as surprised, at his response that he rejects the premise that we would ever get off fossil fuels. This actually puts a number to when we have to be off fossil fuels. And that's in the maximum allowable situation of where our global warming we limit to. So by 2040, we have to be finished the fossil fuel game. By 2020, we have to have no more open pit mining left. The National Energy Board released a study this year called Energy Futures 2016, where they completely ignored the fact that any of this is happening and that the world is trying to get off of fossil fuels. They predicted that Canadian production would actually grow by 75% by 2040, and that in 2040 we will be producing a third of that limit for the next 40 years in the study. It would be 6 million barrels per day. So these are two diametrically opposed situations, and the worldview of the National Energy Board is that is to ignore the reality that the rest of the world has already agreed to. When you're asking what was left out of the National Energy Board process, this is what was left out. Any economic consideration for whether this pipeline has any place in a 1.5 degree world was completely ignored. And I don't know how this government expects to make science and evidence-based decisions when one of its policies contradicts another one. So nobody has factored the climate properly into this process. Throwing an upstream emissions analysis into this is a joke. Why would you not consider the vast majority of emissions that occur when it's being combusted? As I mentioned to you in Abbotsford, there are already places that are doing this. Washington has interpreted their law pretty significantly to look at the full emissions of a process, so it would not be the first. I also just wanted to mention that when we talk about climate change, it's often in numbers and targets and legal jargon and the various science terms that we have. But what came across my Facebook feed this morning was a young boy in Syria that was facing outwards in the back of an ambulance. He was 5 years old. His name was Omran Dakni, and he was pulled out of rubble in Aleppo, where obviously the Syrian civil war has been raging for 5 years now. That war has direct links to climate change. At the end of the last decade, a drought hit Syria, the worst historic drought they've ever had, and people who were living in communities outside of the cities had to move to the cities where the government had no capacity to deal with their problems. I would never say that it was caused by climate change, because obviously there are countless other solutions there, but even the Pentagon acknowledges that it was a major contributing factor. So what we are looking at is a world that has many more Syrias if we continue down the fossil fuel path. And I don't think that that's a responsible situation for our government to put us in. It's the kind of thing that keeps people from my generation. I'm 25 and I am looking at the age where a lot of my friends are having kids or saving for a house. I'm not really sure what to do with that, because I don't know how I could, on the kids issue, I don't know how I could deal with the fact that I would look at this person that I love so much and not be able to ensure a safe world for them. And so what Jeanette brought up this morning, the mental health impacts of climate change on our young people, I personally experience very much. So the only thing that I can really see, the only option is to fight these projects tooth and nail. And I think there are a lot of people in my generation that will step up to do the same. So regardless of the government's decision, I hope that people are ready to shut this pipeline down, but I would ask that the government reject this pipeline.